The man in black in the alley's shadow. The heavy oak doors of the Ryman swung shut behind Johnny, swallowing the last echoes of Ring of Fire. The Nashville night air, thick with humidity even this late, pressed against his skin like a damp shroud. He pulled his collar up, more against the sudden quiet than the chill. The stage lights, still blazing inside, cast long, skeletal shadows from the wrought iron fence onto the sidewalk. A mournful howl sliced through the city's hum. Not a comfortable, house-dog sort of sound, but a keening, desperate cry that seemed to claw at the darkness. Johnny paused, halfway to his Cadillac. The sound had come from the alley that ran alongside the auditorium, a place he usually avoided, a repository for discarded dreams and forgotten bottles. He hesitated. He was tired, bone-tired. But the howl, it had sounded so utterly alone. He deterred, his boots clicking softly on the pavement. The alley reeked of stale beer and despair. The dim glow spilling from a distant streetlight barely penetrated the gloom. He saw it then, a huddled shape pressed against the brick wall, almost invisible in the shadows. The dog, a scrawny mutt with ribs showing, circled the figure warily, its eyes reflecting the faint light like chips of obsidian. "Hey there," Johnny said, his voice low and gentle. He stopped a few feet away, not wanting to startle whoever was there. The figure didn't react. He edged closer. It was a man, his clothes rumpled and stained, his face hidden by a tangled beard. A faded army jacket hung loosely on his frame. He was clutching something in his hand, something small and square. The dog whined, nudging the man's leg with its nose. Still, there was no response. "Sir?" Johnny tried again, a little louder. "Are you all right?" The man flinched, his head snapping up. His eyes, when they met Johnny's, were haunted, filled with a deep, unyielding pain. He blinked, as if struggling to focus. For a moment, Johnny thought he wouldn't speak, that the words had been choked out of him long ago. Then, a raspy voice, barely a whisper. "Leave me be." Johnny squatted down, careful not to crowd him. He saw now what the man was clutching, a photograph, its edges worn and softened with age. He could make out the blurry image of a young woman, smiling brightly, her arm around a soldier in uniform. "Rough night?" Johnny asked, keeping his voice calm and non-threatening. The man's gaze flickered back to the photograph, his grip tightening. A single tear traced a path through the grime on his cheek. "They all are," he mumbled. "Name's Johnny," he offered, extending a hand. "Johnny Cash." The man stared at his hand, then back up at Johnny's face, a flicker of recognition in his eyes. He didn't take the hand. "Walker," he said, his voice a little stronger now. "Thomas Walker." Johnny withdrew his hand slowly. "Well, Mr. Walker," he said, "it looks like you could use a friend." He nodded toward the dog. "And I reckon your friend here could use a sandwich." Thomas looked at the dog, then back at Johnny, a flicker of something that might have been hope in his eyes. The howl of the dog had drawn Johnny in, but the man's eyes, filled with a bottomless, silent scream, were what would keep him there. The shadows of the alley seemed to deepen, as if holding their breath, waiting to see what would happen next. Echoes of war. The harmonica wailed a mournful note, cut short as a figure emerged from the shadows. Thomas flinched, a strangled cry escaping his lips. He scrambled back against the brick wall, eyes wide and darting, like a trapped animal. His hand, calloused and scarred, instinctively went to his side, as if searching for a weapon that wasn't there. "Whoa, easy there, friend," the man said, his voice a low rumble that somehow managed to sound both imposing and gentle. It was the harmonica player. Johnny Cash. Thomas didn't register the name. He saw only the approaching figure, a large silhouette against the dim streetlights. "Stay back," he rasped, his voice raw and unused. "I don't want any trouble." Johnny stopped, his hands raised slightly in a gesture of peace. "I just heard your music. Sounded like you could use a friend." He remained a few feet away, giving Thomas space. The air crackled with unspoken tension. The smell of stale beer and damp concrete hung heavy. Thomas shook his head, his eyes unfocused. Music's gone. Just gone. He muttered something unintelligible, a jumble of words lost in the night. Shadows, always shadows. His breathing was shallow and rapid. Johnny took another slow, deliberate step closer. What shadows, friend? Thomas recoiled again, pressing himself harder against the wall. The fire, the screaming. God, the screaming. He squeezed his eyes shut, his face contorted in pain. They just kept coming, wave after wave. Johnny recognized the signs. He'd seen it before, the 1,000-yard stare, the disjointed ramblings, the crippling fear. You were in the war, weren't you? He asked softly. Thomas didn't answer, but his body language spoke volumes. He was rigid, his muscles coiled tight, ready to spring into action or collapse completely. A single tear traced a path through the grime on his cheek. It's okay, Johnny said, his voice a steady anchor in the swirling chaos of Thomas's mind. You're safe now. There's no war here. He crouched down, bringing himself to Thomas's level. My name's Johnny. What's yours? The question seemed to break through the fog. Thomas blinked, his eyes focusing for a brief moment. Thomas, he whispered, his voice barely audible. Thomas Walker. Thomas, Johnny repeated, testing the name on his tongue. It's good to meet you, Thomas. Tell me about the shadows if you want. Or don't. Just know you're not alone. He pulled out a pack of cigarettes and offered one to Thomas, his movements slow and deliberate. Sometimes just talking helps. A veteran's tale. Another night, another kingdom of cardboard, Thomas muttered, directing the words more at the uncaring brick than the newcomer who'd materialized beside him. He'd been too engrossed in the maelstrom of his past to register the man's arrival. Harsh conditions, the stranger observed, his voice a blend of sandpaper and sweet liquor, extending a paper cup. Steam feathered into the frigid air. Coffee. Packs a wallop. Thomas accepted the offering, the heat a fleeting defense against the icy penetration. He tasted the brew, the acrid flavor familiar. You have no idea. Harsh is a vacation compared to this. Silence descended, broken only by the urban thrum in the distance. Then, against his better judgment, the floodgates gave way. Saigon. He choked, the name a bitter residue on his breath. 68. Thought I was invincible, fresh from training. Didn't comprehend true inferno. Didn't grasp what vanished. He squeezed his eyes shut, the vision branded onto his inner sight, Danny, his comrade, claimed by a hidden trap in a rice field. The man beside him, Johnny, as he'd offered as his name, remained silent, an attentive ear. Thomas unspooled the story, a deluge of suppressed sorrow. Returned home, a hero, they declared. But a hero I wasn't. Heroes don't bolt awake screaming. Heroes aren't spooked by every shadow. Heroes sure as hell don't feel tethered to that place, mired in the muck and carnage. He'd attempted normalcy. Dear God, he'd strived. Landed a job at the lumberyard, but the screech of the saws mirrored the scream of falling ordnance. Then the fits came, the cold sweats, the explosions of rage. His wife, God love her, had tried to fathom it, but how could she? How could anyone who hadn't borne witness? Lost the job then. Lost my wife. Lost my kids. They were frightened by me. Said I wasn't the father they remembered. He offered a laugh, a brittle, broken sound. They were right. That man perished in the jungle. This is just a husk. He scrubbed at his eyes with a callous hand. Tried to seek assistance. The VA prescribed pills. Rendered me a ghost. Didn't quell the nightmares, just muted them. So I discontinued them. He took another swallow of coffee, the warmth a fragile barricade against the brutal landscape. Now, I exist here. Suppose this is my rightful place. Among the specters. Johnny didn't respond for a long moment. Then, he stated simply, This isn't where you belong, Thomas. Nobody does. He hesitated, then added, There's a haven, a sanctuary, in Tennessee. Managed by good souls. They understand. They've witnessed it all. They can guide you back to yourself. If you're willing. Breakfast and broken bridges. The diner's fluorescent buzz was a monotonous drone. Johnny settled into the booth opposite Thomas, the cool vinyl a slight shock. Twin plumes of steam ascended from their mugs, the aroma of strong coffee cutting through the pre-dawn quiet, punctuated only by the distant clink of cutlery as a waitress prepped for the breakfast crowd. A faint blush was painting the horizon. "Toast all right?" Johnny inquired, gesturing towards the plate of dark-edged sourdough. Thomas offered no reply, his attention lost in the dark swirl of his coffee. The sleeplessness etched on his face was unmistakable, a network of lines mapping worry and fatigue. At length he spoke, his voice a low rasp. "She had a thing for toast like this. Said the char tasted like bonfires." Johnny waited, nursing his coffee. He knew the value of silence. Let it come when he was ready. "Sarah," Thomas managed, the name catching in his throat like a sob. "My little girl." The bell above the door announced a new arrival, momentarily shattering the stillness. A construction worker, his face smeared with grime, requested coffee and a short stack. Johnny watched him briefly, a silent recognition of life's relentless march, regardless of personal grief. We were inseparable once. Fishing trips aplenty. Baseball games under the summer sun. I even coached her softball team. She was a natural at shortstop." A fleeting smile ghosted across Thomas's face, then vanished as quickly as it appeared. He worried a frayed edge on his jacket. "Then, I came home. But I wasn't really home, not whole. Just broken. Bitter. Battling demons the bottle couldn't drown. Pushing everyone I loved away." The coffee remained untouched, a dark pool reflecting his despair. Johnny nudged the plate closer. "Guilt's a weight that can crush you, friend. More than any rucksack you carried over there." Thomas finally lifted his gaze, his eyes bloodshot. "She wants nothing to do with me. Changed her number. Vanished. I don't even know where she is." His voice faltered. "And maybe she's right. What kind of a father am I now? What kind of future could I even offer her?" Johnny met his gaze squarely, his own filled with quiet strength. A chance at healing. An opportunity to offer forgiveness. The chance to be forgiven. These are powerful gifts, Thomas. Don't dismiss yourself. Don't diminish their worth. He reached out, his hand, roughened by time and labor, covering Thomas's trembling one. "It's going to be a long road. But you don't have to walk it alone. We'll find her, Thomas. And after that, it's between you both. But you have to be willing to take the first step. To try." A hand up. Johnny watched Thomas pick at the seams of his worn-out jacket, his gaze fixed on the cracked pavement. The silence stretched, thick and heavy with unspoken pain. "You know," Johnny said, his voice low and steady, "there are folks who can help you sort through all this. People who understand." Thomas flinched, his eyes darting up, suspicion clouding their depths. "Help? Nobody can help. It's all in here." He tapped his temple, a hollow sound against the backdrop of the city's hum. Johnny nodded slowly, understanding etched on his face. He pulled out his phone, a simple, battered thing. "Mind if I make a call? There's a doctor I know, Evelyn Reed. She works with veterans, specializes in PTSD. Good woman." Thomas recoiled. "Therapy? No. I ain't talking about it. Ain't gonna relive it." Johnny held up a hand, a gesture of reassurance. "Just hear her out, Thomas. That's all I ask. No pressure, just a conversation." He dialed the number, his thumb a familiar weight on the keypad. "Evelyn?" "Johnny Cash. Got a friend here, Thomas, a veteran who could use your expertise." He listened intently, his eyes never leaving Thomas's face, relaying a brief summary of Thomas's situation. "He's hesitant, understandably so." "All right, I appreciate that. We'll see you tomorrow then." He hung up, a small smile playing on his lips. "She has an opening tomorrow afternoon." "Just a chat, Thomas?" No commitment. The next afternoon, Johnny's Cadillac rumbled down a tree-lined street, pulling up outside a low, brick building. "This is the place," Johnny announced, cutting the engine. "But first, there's something else. A support group meets tonight, just a few blocks from here. Other veterans, sharing their experiences. Figured you might want to meet them." Thomas stared out the window, his knuckles white as he gripped the door handle. "I don't belong there. I ain't like them." "How do you know?" Johnny asked gently. "You might be surprised. They understand things most folks can't even imagine." Later, inside a dimly lit community hall, the air thick with the aroma of stale coffee and shared experiences, Thomas sat stiffly on a folding chair, his gaze fixed on the floor. Veterans of different ages and backgrounds were sharing stories, their voices sometimes breaking with emotion, sometimes filled with a surprising camaraderie. He saw a flicker of recognition in their eyes, a silent acknowledgement of the battles fought, both seen and unseen. As Johnny clapped him on the shoulder to leave, Thomas mumbled, "I can't do this, Johnny. It's too much." "Take your time, Thomas," Johnny said, his voice barely a whisper. "One step at a time. That's all anyone can do." Facing the shadows. The waiting room reeked of disinfectant and unspoken anxieties. Thomas worried at a fraying thread on the chair's armrest, anything preferable to acknowledging the others sharing his purgatory. A young woman, eyes vacant, flipped listlessly through a magazine. An elderly gentleman punctuated the silence with nervous taps of his walking stick. He felt out of place, an imposter. This was for the broken, the ones incapable of silencing their inner turmoil. He was a warrior. Warriors didn't require mending from shrinks. Just as he contemplated a hasty exit, a voice, laced with kindness, cut through his thoughts. "Thomas Walker?" Dr. Reed offered a hand, her grasp both steady and comforting. "Please come in." The office proved surprisingly welcoming, a far cry from the sterile environment he had anticipated. Sunlight painted the shelves, laden with well-loved books, in a warm glow. A plush armchair faced a leather couch. He gravitated towards the armchair, needing the illusion of defined boundaries. Dr. Reed settled onto the couch, her demeanor relaxed yet focused. "So, Thomas, Johnny tells me you've seen some things." He tensed. Johnny. Always Johnny. This hadn't been his idea. "Johnny means well," he muttered, his gaze fixed on the floor. "He does. He cares deeply. But this is about you, Thomas. About what you desire." She paused, allowing the silence to settle. "Why don't you start by telling me what brought you here?" The stillness hung thick and oppressive. Fragments assaulted him, the sweltering jungle, the faces of comrades lost, the inferno consuming the village. The memories threatened to drown him. His hands clenched, knuckles bone-white. Later that evening, back at Johnny's, the air vibrated with the soft murmur of Johnny's guitar, a gentle balm against the rawness of the day. Thomas remained a statue in his chair, the session with Dr. Reed looping endlessly in his mind. He had offered up nothing but silence. Johnny's music trailed off. "Tough one, huh?" Thomas recoiled. "A waste. I don't need some stranger poking around in all of this." Johnny leaned forward, his expression sincere. "I get it. Trust me, I do. You think I haven't walked that road? Grappled with my own shadows, my personal hell?" He indicated himself with a gesture. "This whole damn existence has felt like a war. The pills, the bottle, that was me trying to shut down the noise, the guilt, the damn pain. But it doesn't work, Thomas. It only pushes it down, letting it rot." He paused, his eyes holding Thomas's. "Talking helps. It won't erase what's happened, but it can offer a path to living with it. A chance to find peace." Johnny's fingers found the strings again, coaxing out a slow, mournful blues. "I'm not saying it's easy. It's the hardest thing I've ever faced. But you're worth it, Thomas. You are." The sheer vulnerability in Johnny's voice breached Thomas's defenses. He finally met Johnny's gaze, seeing not pity, but a shared understanding, forged in the crucible of similar demons. Back in Dr. Reed's office, the following week, the words started to flow. Tentatively at first, then with a rising urgency, they poured out as if a levee had burst. He recounted the ambush, the echoing screams, the cold, heavy feel of his rifle. He spoke of the burden of survival, the relentless conviction that he was undeserving of life. Dr. Reed listened with unwavering patience, offering no judgment. She cultivated a space where, after years of silence, he could finally release the weight he had been carrying. "It's all right to feel," she murmured gently when he. A concert of hope. The stage lights kissed Johnny's face as the opening chords of Ring of Fire reverberated from his guitar. The crowd erupted, a tidal surge of sound and energy that buoyed him. He squeezed his eyes shut, the image of Thomas's haunted visage flashing behind his lids, the invisible wounds of conflict carved deep. Tonight, the music transcended mere entertainment. It was a flare in the dark, a symbol of hope for those like Thomas, adrift in a sea of shadows. He poured his heart into the song, each note a distilled emotion that pulsed through the auditorium. The applause crashed like thunder after the final chord, yet Johnny stilled the clamor with a raised hand. "I want to tell you about a hero," he began, his voice a low rasp. "A man who defended this nation, a man who witnessed horrors beyond comprehension." He paused, allowing the gravity of his words to settle. "His name is Thomas Walker. He's a veteran, a father, a man shouldering the invisible weight of war." He shared Thomas's story, carefully skirting the most gruesome realities, emphasizing instead his spirit, his tenacity, and the scars that lay beneath the surface. He spoke of the haunting nights, the unwelcome flashbacks, the debilitating anxiety that had driven Thomas to the streets. "Thomas is with us in spirit tonight," Johnny announced, his gaze sweeping the audience. The unspoken truth resonated. He is not alone. Countless others endure similar battles, suffering in silence, seemingly abandoned by the very country they pledged to protect. He implored the audience to contribute, to offer solace, to remember the sacrifices of these valiant individuals. Hundreds of miles away, in a cramped apartment strewn with textbooks and burgeoning art projects, Sarah Walker watched the performance unfold on the screen. A tremor ran through her hands as Johnny Cash recounted her father's struggles. The camera roamed across the audience, their faces mirroring compassion and concern. A solitary tear trickled down her cheek, leaving a glistening trail. Years had passed since she'd last seen her father, not since he'd deliberately pushed her away, believing he was shielding her. She'd constructed a fortress around her heart, brick by painful brick, to insulate herself from his absence. But hearing Johnny Cash, a figure she revered, speak with such genuine empathy about her father, began to erode those fortifications. He painted a portrait of a man she scarcely recognized, a man damaged yet not beyond redemption. A flicker of hope ignited within her. She'd always held on to the belief that her father was inherently good, merely lost in the labyrinth of his pain. Perhaps, just perhaps, there was still a chance for reconciliation. As Johnny launched into the driving rhythm of Folsom Prison Blues, Sarah's hand instinctively moved towards her phone, her fingers hovering uncertainly over the keypad. A wave of trepidation washed over her. What if he rejected her? What if he remained the embittered, aloof figure of her memories? But then, the memory of Johnny's earnest expression, the palpable sincerity in his voice, resurfaced. She considered the countless veterans battling similar demons, like her father. Drawing a resolute breath, she began to type, her heart hammering against her ribs. It was a brief message, a simple greeting, but it was a beginning. A concert of hope, indeed. Reconnecting. The last echo of Ring of Fire died away, applause a muffled wave against Sarah's ears. Killing the live stream, she couldn't shake the lingering image of her father's bow, a frail silhouette of the man she remembered. He seemed so diminished. The memory of him, hoisting her high above cheering crowds, now felt like a faded photograph. Her thumb hovered over the call icon. Years. A chasm of silence, filled with unwritten letters and unspoken regrets. A shard of apprehension pierced her. Rejection? Accusation? But the ghost of his face, mirroring her own sadness, steeled her resolve. She tapped the button. 3 rings stretched into an eternity before a gravelly voice broke the silence. "Hello?" Sarah's breath hitched. "Dad? It's Sarah." A profound stillness followed, save for the crackle of static. She could practically feel his stunned silence. "Sarah?" he breathed, disbelief lacing his tone. "Is it really you?" "Yes, Dad. I caught the concert online." Another pause. "Right. The concert." He sounded adrift, disconnected. "I was hoping. Maybe we could talk? It's been such a long time, but..." The words spilled out, a torrent of yearning and trepidation. "Talk?" He tasted the word like a forgotten spice. Then, a sigh that spoke of exhaustion. "Perhaps. I'm working with someone, a therapist. She's been a great help." A spark of optimism ignited in Sarah's chest. Could I join one of your sessions?" Another drawn-out silence. "I'll ask her," he finally conceded. "Give me your number." The cafe was a cozy haven, tucked away from the bustling city. Sarah, arriving well ahead of time, felt a tempest brewing in her stomach. She cradled a mug of tea, its warmth doing little to thaw her inner chill. When Thomas entered, guided by a woman with gentle eyes and an air of serenity, she barely recognized him. He was gaunter, worry etched deeply into his face, but a faint ember of the old Thomas still flickered in his gaze. "Sarah," Dr. Reed greeted, extending a hand. "It's wonderful to finally meet you. I'm Evelyn." Thomas offered only a curt nod, avoiding eye contact. The therapy room was bathed in soft light. Dr. Reed settled into a worn armchair, radiating composure. Thomas perched rigidly on the edge of a sofa, his knuckles white as he clenched his hands. Sarah sat close beside him, a physical proximity that belied the emotional gulf between them. "So, Thomas," Dr. Reed began softly, "perhaps you could share with Sarah what we've been discussing?" He hesitated, then mumbled, The memories. They're relentless." "What sort of memories, Dad?" Sarah asked gently, her voice barely a whisper. He recoiled slightly at. "Dad." "The war," he breathed, his voice thready. "The things I witnessed. The things I did." Dr. Reed offered an encouraging nod. "It's all right, Thomas. You're in a safe space here. Share whatever you feel ready for." Sarah reached for his hand. His skin felt rough, weathered, but his grip possessed surprising strength. "I want to understand," she said, her voice raw with sincerity. "I want to help you." He met her gaze then, his eyes reflecting a swirling vortex of anguish and burgeoning hope. "It's not easy," he croaked, his voice fracturing. "But maybe, with you here, it won't be quite so unbearable." A new beginning. The linoleum gleamed under the weak overhead light as Thomas jammed the key into the lock. He pushed the door open, the scent of fresh paint still clinging to the air. "Well, what do you think, Johnny?" "Not exactly Graceland, but it's mine." Johnny stepped inside, his boots quiet on the floor. The apartment was small, just a living room, a tiny kitchenette, and a bedroom barely big enough for a bed. But it was clean, uncluttered, and held a palpable sense of possibility. "It's solid, Thomas. Real solid. A man needs a place to call his own." He clapped Thomas on the shoulder, a gesture that felt less like encouragement and more like quiet understanding. Thomas ran a hand over the worn armchair he'd salvaged from the donation center. "Yeah, well, thanks to you, I got a place and a job." The next morning, the smell of coffee replaced the lingering scent of paint. Thomas adjusted his new work shirt, the fabric stiff against his skin. He caught his reflection in the bathroom mirror. The haunted look in his eyes seemed a little less intense than it had been. He took a deep breath and headed out the door, the keys to the hardware store jingling in his pocket. The store was bustling, a symphony of hammering, buzzing saws, and the murmur of conversations. Thomas felt a surge of anxiety as he walked behind the counter, but the friendly face of Mr. Henderson, the owner, put him at ease. He spent the day stocking shelves, assisting customers, and learning the inventory. The work was simple, repetitive, but it grounded him, pulling him back to the present. Weeks turned into months. Thomas found a rhythm in his new life. He woke up early, went to work, came home to his small apartment. He even started cooking simple meals, the act of nourishing himself a small victory. He still had nightmares, the ghosts of his past still clawing at him in the dark, but they were becoming less frequent, less vivid. One evening, Johnny came by, guitar case in hand. They sat on Thomas's porch, the setting sun painting the sky in hues of orange and purple. Johnny strummed a soft melody, the notes weaving a tapestry of hope and resilience. "You know, Thomas," Johnny said, his voice low, "I've seen a lot of darkness in my life. But I've also seen a lot of light. And you, my friend, you're shining pretty bright right now." Thomas looked at Johnny, his eyes filled with gratitude. "I couldn't have done it without you, Johnny. You didn't give up on me." Johnny just smiled. "A man doesn't leave another man behind. That's all there is to it." Sarah watched the grainy video of her father from her laptop. The concert was months old, but the clip had just surfaced online. She saw his face in the crowd, a face etched with pain but also something else. Hope? She hadn't spoken to him in years, the rift between them a chasm of unspoken words and unresolved anger. But seeing him there, looking better, stirred something within her. Maybe, just maybe, it was time. The friendship between Thomas and Johnny deepened. They went to baseball games, shared meals, and talked for hours about everything and nothing. Johnny never pried, never pushed, but he was always there, a steady presence in Thomas's life. He was more than a friend, he was a brother, a lifeline in the turbulent sea of Thomas's past. Thomas was beginning to believe that a new beginning was possible, that the scars of war didn't have to define him, that he could find peace, and maybe, just maybe, even happiness.